Managing React state. Let's talk about how to handle complex state without a library in React. If you search for React state libraries, you will find plenty of them. Even here, the first Google hit is already about the 18 best React state libraries in this year. But today, we want to learn the React way, so really the native way directly with React. Let's take a look at some real-world example. This application I'm currently building, you could say on a higher level, it's a Figma clone. So you can create nice looking screenshots of your code. Let's type in here something, give it also a name, and then maybe let's select a nice theme. And then you have your code snippet here. Let's maybe rotate it back, and you could move it around on your screen. Then you have also different elements like the arrow, which is currently a circle because it's a work in progress. You could move it here around, and then you also have some keyboard events, like you can zoom in and zoom out via the keyboard or also the mouse wheel. And why I would consider this to be a more complex state. First of all, you can undo and redo actions. You can also see it here. I could undo and again undo, or just press the key. And then I can also redo stuff. So I need to keep track of that. And then you also state and basically all the components here on the left-hand side. You can see, for example, which element is currently selected. Here also the zoom is in the state. Then, of course, the center itself, but also on the right-hand side, you have different information based on which element is selected. Then the keyboard interacts with the state, and also the library, which is used here. It's called movable and pretty cool. Also interacts with the state. So there is state based in all the components, and it's also assessed in different ways. Let's go one step back. This is the first Google hit. Let's take a brief look. So still on place one is Redux, which used to be quite popular in the past. And then there's the new kid on the block Zustand, which is really popular these days. You can also see it here in the GitHub stars. And if we take a look at Zustand, you can also see they're making here a pretty clear statement about how they see the library. But as promised, today we want to learn the React way. So really do it with plain React. Let's get started. We go to that page. It's the learning page of React. There's a section about managing state. If you want to learn the basics, you can also, of course, go to that page, but we are going to directly jump to the last chapter. It's about scaling up your state management with combining a reducer and a context, because you can combine both of them to really handle complex screens. Here on this page, they're building a simple task list, but we want to take a look into the application I just showed to you. We start by defining our state. So what do we actually want to store in our state? We have our editor state, which has different attributes. For example, the zoom, which we can see here on the top right, and it has a list of pages. So you can have here multiple pages. We currently just have one. A page has some kind of ID and again some other attributes, for example, the size. And the page has a list of layers. So in the UI, it's called elements. So this is what's visible to the user, but internally, these are called layers. And these layers, they have some common attributes like an ID and the React reference, but also props based on the type. For example, the arrow here, which is our circle, has some kind of color. The first step is to create a reducer. For that, we create a function called editor provider. Apart from the children, it gets as input the saved state, which also can be null, because if you open the editor for the first time, then you start from scratch. But of course, you can also have the case you have saved a file in the editor and then you load it. In the provider, we create the reducer by using React's useReducer function. The second argument is here our function called getInitialState. The getInitialState gets as input the saved state, which can be again null. So in case our saved state is null, so we open the editor for the first time. We just return our editor state, which we had defined in the first place, with some default values, for example the zoom set to 100, and there are no layers yet. If we have some saved state, we need to transform it into our editor state. There are a few minor differences. For example, we have the React reference, which we do not store in the database. Then we have our function, which returns the initial state to our useReducer function. The reducer function gets as input our state and some kind of action and returns the updated state. So this is the current state and this is the updated state. So we need to define our actions. In our case, we have here different kind of types. For example, if you add a new layer, you get as input a layer without the React reference, or if you delete the layer, we just get the ID. Now we have defined our actions and have to implement them. So we can switch on the type. A simple example is the setZoom action, where we just take the current state and only modify the zoom property. A more complex one is if we add a new layer, because we have list within list. But basically what it does, here it updates the layers. So we take the current one and then append a new one. Additionally, we also set that the new layer is automatically selected. And now we have created our reducer function, and it returns the state and a function to modify it. We can use it in our editor provider. For that, we need to use two contexts. The first one gets as input the state, and the second one the dispatch, so it can modify the state. And then you can create two hooks for accessing these. And that's all. We have created our reducer. Now let's use it. For example, we have on the top right in the navigation the zoom displayed. It's the zoom item. The zoom item uses the editor and the editor dispatch. The editor is used to display, for example, the value in the top right, or for example also to disable the zoom in case we already zoomed in a lot. But we can also modify the state. If we click here, zoom in, we send some action of type zoom with a delta of 10. And of course we can do the same in other spots too. This function is handling the keyboard events, and there, in case we get a certain key, we can also simply dispatch that zoom element. And you maybe notice we haven't used our provider yet. Of course, to make that really work, you have to use the provider. So here's the actual editor, and around that we wrap then our editor provider, which gets as input the saved state. Within that editor provider, we also have a different one, the history provider. And I want to show it to you because it has a different interface to the outside. Again, in this history provider, we have our useReducer to create a new reducer. It also uses now our editor dispatch because the history needs to modify the editor state in case we undo or redo action. And here we define now three functions: append, undo, and redo. The same as for the editor, we have a context returning the state. But here it now differs. Instead of returning the dispatch, we actually do return three functions: append, undo, and redo. Let's take a look into the undo function. The undo function first has to handle some special cases, so to keep tracks of where in the history we are, and you not always can go back. For example, if you open the application and haven't done any action, you can't undo it. So it keeps track, for example, of the undo index. And then it dispatches some undo action to itself, because the history, for example, keeps track of this index and then needs to update the undo index. And then it has to update the editor state. For that, we take a look into what kind of event type happened. If the last event was, for example, an event to add a new layer, then we now need to dispatch to the editor, hey, please delete this layer. And again, we can use it. For example, in the header, we have the file item where you can undo and redo actions. You can see it on the right side. And this file item now uses the two hooks. The same as before, it can read the state, for example, to disable here the undo button, but of course also modify it. But instead of now dispatching an action, we can just call our undo function. To recap, why are we doing that? Because the undo function, it not only modifies the history state, it also modifies the editor state. That's the end. We can combine a reducer with a context to really handle complex state directly with React. I hope you have learned something new. Let me also know your opinion in the comments. See you!